I'm Janet, 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the family's reliable backup. My older sister Beverly was the star, the Harvard-educated lawyer. I was just the graphic designer. When our dad had a massive heart attack, that should have been our moment to finally pull together. To forget the roles we always played and just be a family. But while Beverly was picking out venues for her lavish engagement party, I was secretly draining my life savings to keep my parents from losing their home. Over $15,000 in just 3 months. As I handed my mom another check, she looked at me with pure disappointment and said, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" That sentence, after everything I'd sacrificed, it just gutted me. But she had no idea I documented every single dollar. And I was about to expose the truth in front of everyone. While my family was busy celebrating Beverly's every move, I was quietly building an empire they knew nothing about. It started at my day job, a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. They hired me right out of community college for a junior designer role. To my mom, it was my little art job, a cute hobby that paid just enough to cover my rent. She'd ask me on the phone, her voice laced with that familiar, patronizing tone. "So, are you still managing to pay your bills with those drawings?" She never understood. She never saw the fire in me. At the office, I wasn't just Janet. I was the one they called when a project was falling apart. I was the one who could take a client's jumbled, incoherent idea and turn it into a sleek, powerful campaign. My boss, a tough-as-nails woman named Sarah, started noticing. She saw me staying late, not because I had to, but because I was obsessed with getting it right. She saw me volunteering for the toughest clients, the ones everyone else avoided. After a year, she pulled me aside. "Janet," she said, "I'm making you a senior designer, and you're leading the pitch for the new Rivera Automotive account." Rivera Automotive. That was a massive account, a game changer. I nailed the pitch. We won the contract. And with that promotion came a significant pay bump. My mom's reaction when I told her? A distracted, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Did you hear Beverly just made associate?" But my 9 to 5 was only half the story. The real work began when I got home. While my friends were out at bars and while Beverly was at fancy networking dinners, I was firing up my personal laptop. I had started a freelance business on the side. At first, it was just small stuff. Designing logos for local coffee shops, creating flyers for real estate agents. But my reputation grew. People started talking. My work was clean, it was effective, and I never, ever missed a deadline. The coffee shop owner recommended me to a regional restaurant supplier. That supplier recommended me to a tech startup. It was a snowball effect. My social life pretty much evaporated. Friday nights were spent hunched over my desk, fueled by coffee, my apartment lit only by the glow of my monitor. I remember one specific Saturday. My friends were all going on a weekend trip to a lake house. They begged me to come. But I had a huge branding project for a new software company, and the deadline was Monday morning. I had to say no. I saw their pictures on Instagram later that night. Laughing, swimming, gathered around a bonfire. And I was there, alone, refining color palettes and kerning fonts. It hurt. It was lonely. But every time I felt that pang of isolation, I would open my banking app. I had a separate account just for my freelance income. Watching that number climb, that was my fuel. It was my validation. That account became my secret, my weapon. My family had no clue. On Sunday dinners, my dad would ask, "So, how's the art thing going?" And I'd just smile and say, "It's going well, Dad. Keeping busy." They pictured me struggling, barely scraping by, living in a tiny apartment, eating ramen noodles. That image worked for them. It fit their narrative. Janet, the sweet, creative daughter who just couldn't quite get her act together like her brilliant sister. My mom would occasionally try to help. She'd send me job listings for administrative assistant positions or bank teller openings. "Just something stable, dear," she'd say. "Something with a reliable paycheck." A reliable paycheck. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My freelance income alone was starting to rival my full-time salary. One time, after landing a particularly lucrative contract that netted me a $5,000 payout for 2 weeks of work, I went to a family dinner. My mom spent half the evening worrying out loud about my car, my old Honda Civic. "We just worry about you on the highway in that thing, Janet. It's so old. Maybe if you saved up, you could get something safer." I just nodded and said, "I'll think about it, Mom." I didn't tell her that the money in my secret account was more than enough to buy a brand new car in cash. That account grew from a few $100s to a few thousand, then 10,000, then 20. By the time I was 28, I was sitting on a nest egg of over $25,000. It was more than a safety net. It was my escape plan. It was proof that I wasn't the person they thought I was. While they were busy looking down on me, I was building my own ladder. They thought I was stuck in the basement of their expectations, but I was secretly constructing a skyscraper right next door, and they were completely, blissfully unaware of the storm that was coming. They had no idea that their struggling daughter had all the power, and soon, they were going to need it. The storm I never saw coming arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. The call came from my mom, her voice frantic, barely coherent. Dad had collapsed at work. A massive heart attack. I dropped everything, my world screeching to a halt, and rushed to the hospital. For the next 8 hours, we sat in the sterile, silent waiting room, drowning in the antiseptic smell and our own fear. The surgery was successful, the doctors said. But Dad's recovery would be long. He'd be out of work for at least 6 months, maybe more. As a high school principal, Dad's salary had been the bedrock of our family's finances. My mom only worked part-time at the local library. His absence from work wasn't just an emotional blow, it was a financial catastrophe waiting to happen. A week later, the first signs of trouble appeared. My mom started calling me at odd hours. The calls were never direct. They were probing. "Janet, that freelance business of yours," she'd start, her voice unnaturally casual. "Is it consistent? I mean, do you get paid regularly?" I told her it was doing well. "That's good," she'd say, but her tone was distant, like she was calculating something. Then the questions got more specific. I was just thinking, your apartment? How much is your rent again?" I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. It felt less like a mother's curiosity and more like an interrogation. I had this nagging feeling, a quiet alarm bell ringing in the back of my mind, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I just knew something was off. The dam finally broke during one of our hospital visits. My mom pulled out a small notepad, her hands shaking as she scribbled down numbers. "I don't know what we're going to do," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "The mortgage payment is due next week. It's $2,800, and we're already behind on the utilities." She explained that they'd been living paycheck to paycheck for years, that Dad's previous medical bills and home repairs had wiped out their savings. I looked at my dad, lying in that hospital bed, looking so frail, and I knew what I had to do. "Don't worry, Mom," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I can cover it." I told her not to bother Beverly. My sister was so busy with wedding planning and her high-pressure job. I could handle this. My mom's relief was so immediate, so total, that it almost overshadowed her next words. "Are you sure you can afford this, Janet? I know your art business isn't exactly booming." It stung. Even in her desperation, she couldn't help but take a jab. But I pushed it aside. Family was family. That was the beginning. I started transferring money to my parents' account. First, the mortgage payment. Then, the next month, the mortgage plus the utility bills. I was draining my secret account, the one I had worked so hard to build. I started taking on every freelance project that came my way, working 12, sometimes 16-hour days. My apartment became a cave of takeout containers and glowing screens. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. The irony was suffocating. While my sister was tasting wedding cakes and debating flower arrangements, I was quietly ensuring our parents didn't lose their home. And then came Beverly's engagement party. Despite the financial crisis, my mom insisted on it. It had to be a proper showcase, she said. She hired caterers, rented elegant linens, and transformed our backyard into something out of a magazine. Using my money. Money that should have been going into my savings, into my future, was being spent on cocktail napkins and miniature quiches to celebrate the daughter who hadn't contributed a single dime. I spent the morning of the party helping her set up, my resentment simmering just below the surface. As guests arrived, the performance began. Beverly, radiant in a designer dress, her engagement ring sparkling. Her fiancé, Richard, is charming and successful. I stood in the back, feeling like a ghost at my own family's event. Then Mrs. Coleman from down the street asked the fateful question. "Helen, how are both your lovely daughters doing?" And my mom, without a hint of irony, delivered the line that felt like a physical blow. "Beverly is just thriving. And Janet? Well, Janet is still figuring things out with her little art projects." Figuring things out. I had paid for the very chair Mrs. Coleman was sitting on, and I was the one figuring things out. But the ultimate betrayal was yet to come. Later that evening, as the party was in full swing, I saw the catering manager approach my mom. They spoke in hushed tones. I saw the color drain from my mother's face. A moment later, she grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin, and pulled me inside the kitchen. "There's a problem," she hissed, avoiding my eyes. "The final bill. It's a bit more than I anticipated. I'm short. About $800. I just stared at her. My mind was reeling. After the public humiliation, after months of my sacrifice, this was what it came down to: a cash grab. "Where's Beverly?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Where's Richard? He's a surgeon, for God's sake." My mom waved her hand dismissively, as if the idea was absurd. Oh, I could never bother them with this on their special night. It would be so tacky. Tacky. That was the word she used. She was more concerned with appearances than with the reality of the situation. "Janet, please," she begged, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Just check your wallet. I'll pay you back, I promise." A promise I knew was worthless. I was the emergency fund, the invisible, unacknowledged safety net. The daughter she turned to when her perfect world had a crack in it. I didn't say another word. I opened my wallet and pulled out every bill I had. It was the cash I'd budgeted for my groceries, my gas, my entire life for the next 2 weeks. I slapped the wad of bills into her hand. $800. She snatched it from me, not even a flicker of gratitude in her eyes, and scurried back out to the party to smooth things over. To maintain the illusion, I stood there alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the debris of a celebration I had funded. The smell of expensive food, the sound of laughter from the yard. It all felt like an assault. This wasn't just carelessness. This wasn't just an oversight. This was a deliberate act of exploitation, wrapped in the guise of family obligation. She had used me, publicly dismissed me, and then privately bled me dry, all in the same evening. It was a betrayal so profound, so complete, that it carved out a hollow space inside my chest. And in that moment, I knew something had irrevocably broken. The part of me that kept making excuses for her, The part that kept hoping for a crumb of recognition. It died right there on the cold kitchen floor. At this point, I don't even have a word for what I'm feeling. If you're feeling the same rage I am right now, help me out and comment one word to describe what my family did. But instead of collapsing, all that rage, all that pain, it started to solidify into something else, something cold and hard and clear. A plan was beginning to form. The drive home from the engagement party was silent. Not a peaceful silence, but a heavy, ringing silence, the kind that follows an explosion. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, replaying the evening in my head. My mom's dismissive words to our neighbor, her panicked face in the kitchen, the feel of the $800, my grocery money, my gas money, leaving my hand and disappearing into hers without a second thought. I wasn't sad anymore. The familiar ache of disappointment that had been my lifelong companion was gone. In its place, something else was taking root. Something cold and hard. For the next few days, I went into a kind of self-preservation mode. I answered my mom's calls with short, non-committal responses. I kept my conversations with my dad, who was recovering at home now, focused entirely on his health and physical therapy. I was a ghost in my own family, and the most disturbing part was that nobody seemed to notice. They were all too caught up in the whirlwind of Beverly's wedding planning, which had now kicked into high gear. My mom would call, not to ask how I was, but to give me breathless updates. We found the most exquisite calla lilies, Janet, and Beverly's dress. Oh, it's a dream. I would just murmur, "That's great, Mom," and end the call as quickly as possible. The hollowness inside me was vast. The pain from the party hadn't faded. It had just settled. It was no longer a sharp, stabbing wound, but a dense, heavy weight in my gut. I thought that was the bottom. I thought I had finally seen the full extent of their blindness, their casual cruelty. I was wrong. The bottom was much, much deeper than I could have ever imagined. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was working from my apartment, trying to lose myself in a complex rebranding project, when my mom showed up unannounced. This was unusual. She never just dropped by. She always called first. A flicker of anxiety went through me. Maybe something was wrong with Dad. But when I opened the door, she was smiling, holding a small velvet-covered box. "I was just in the neighborhood," she said, her voice unnaturally bright as she stepped inside. "I wanted to talk to you about something." She sat on my couch, placing the box on the coffee table between us. I knew that box. It held the only thing of real value I owned, sentimentally or otherwise: my grandmother's brooch. My mom's mother had passed away when I was 16, and she had left it to me specifically. It was a beautiful, antique piece, a spray of delicate silver leaves, dotted with tiny seed pearls and a single, small diamond. My grandmother had told me she was giving it to me because I, like her, saw the beauty in small, quiet things. It was my most treasured possession, a tangible link to the one family member who I felt had truly seen me. "We were going over the budget for Beverly's wedding," my mom began, her smile never wavering. "And you know how things are. Everything is just so expensive. We want everything to be perfect for her special day." I didn't say anything. I just stared at the box. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the worn velvet. "You know, this is just sitting in your jewelry box, collecting dust." She opened it. The brooch gleamed under the afternoon light. It was as beautiful and as precious as I remembered. "It's lovely, of course," she continued, "but it's not really your style, is it? It's a bit old-fashioned." And then she delivered the final, fatal blow. "I was talking to a friend of mine who works at a jeweler's," she said, finally looking up and meeting my eyes. Her gaze was clear, unwavering, without a hint of shame. She said a piece like this could be worth quite a bit. A few $1,000s, maybe more. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Enough to cover the entire floral arrangement budget for the wedding, she said, or maybe even put a down payment on their honeymoon to Italy. Beverly has always dreamed of going to Italy. I felt the air leave my lungs. The world seemed to slow down, the buzzing of the city outside my window fading to a dull hum. She wasn't asking me for money. She was asking me to liquidate the last piece of my grandmother's memory, not for an emergency, not to keep a roof over their heads, but to buy flowers. To fund a luxury vacation for the daughter who had everything. She wanted me to sacrifice my inheritance, my one sentimental treasure, for an aesthetic, for an optional, extravagant expense. Think of it as your wedding gift to your sister, she added, her smile tightening just a little at my silence. A truly meaningful contribution. A meaningful contribution. That was the phrase that did it. That was the moment the last frayed thread of hope inside me finally snapped. All the money I had poured into their lives for the last 4 months, the $16,000 that had kept them afloat, that wasn't a meaningful contribution. Saving them from foreclosure, paying for my father's medication, keeping the lights on, that was just my duty, an unspoken tax for being the lesser daughter. But selling my soul for centerpieces? That would be meaningful. In that instant, 28 years of hurt, of being overlooked, of being told I wasn't enough, didn't erupt into a scream. It didn't turn into tears. It did something far stranger. It crystallized. The hot, messy pain I had carried for so long cooled, hardened, and sharpened into a single, perfect point of clarity. I saw my mother, my family, and my entire life with a brutal, unforgiving precision. They would never change. They would never see me. They would take and take and take until there was nothing left of me, and they would do it with a smile, telling me it was for my own good. The little girl inside me who had spent her whole life begging for their approval finally went silent. She stood up, turned her back, and walked away. I looked at my mother, the woman who gave birth to me, and I felt nothing. Nothing but a profound, chilling emptiness. No, I said. The word was quiet. It was flat. Devoid of any emotion. It was the most powerful word I had ever spoken. My mom's smile faltered. She blinked, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. What did you say? I said no. I repeated, my voice just as calm, just as dead. The brooch is not for sale. I stood up, walked over to my desk, and sat down in my chair, turning my back to her. I clicked my mouse, opening a design file on my screen. I could feel her staring at my back, her shock and disbelief radiating across the room. I didn't turn around. The conversation was over. My life as their doormat, their ATM, their emotional punching bag, was over. After a long, heavy silence, I heard her stand up, snap the velvet box shut, and walk out of my apartment, closing the door quietly behind her. I didn't move for a long time. I just stared at the screen, the colors of my project blurring together. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I felt calm. A strange glacial calm had settled over me. The war was over, and I had finally accepted the terms of surrender. Only I wasn't the one surrendering. I was accepting that I had been fighting alone on a battlefield of my own making, hoping for a peace treaty that was never going to be offered. That night, I didn't try to sleep. The exhaustion I'd felt for months was gone, replaced by a cold, focused energy. I drove back to my apartment after a late night at the office. I walked inside, locked the deadbolt, and leaned against the door. This space, my space, the one thing in my life that was completely and utterly mine, paid for by my own hard work. The work they called my little art projects. I made a pot of strong black coffee, And then I sat down at my desk. I didn't open a design file. I opened a new Excel spreadsheet. The first thing I did was create a title in a bold, simple font. Family Financial Support Ledger, March, July. I created 4 columns: date, description, source account, amount. And then I began to work. Methodically, emotionlessly. I opened my online banking portal in another window. I went back 4 months, to the week after my dad's heart attack. The first entry was easy. March 15th, mortgage payment, April, my savings account, $2,800. Click. The numbers sat there, stark and black on the white screen. I kept going, line by line. April 1st, utility bill, electric and gas, my freelance account, $321. Click. April 18th, dad's prescription copays, my savings account, $187. Click. The spreadsheet grew, a digital tapestry of my silent sacrifice. Each number was a ghost of a night out with friends I'd missed, a ghost of a weekend trip I couldn't take, a ghost of the new tires I desperately needed for my car, but had put off buying. I got to the engagement party. July 12th. Final catering payment, cash, my checking account, $800. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I added a note in the description column, requested by Mom in cash during the event. I worked for hours, the only sound in my apartment the quiet, rhythmic clicking of the keyboard. It was like I was an archaeologist, painstakingly unearthing the evidence of a forgotten civilization. My civilization. When I was done, I created a final row at the bottom. Total. I entered the formula, and then I hit enter. The number that appeared on the screen made me catch my breath. $16,708. $16,708. I stared at it. It was no longer an abstract feeling of being used. It was a number, a fact, an irrefutable piece of data. This was the price of being the other daughter. But I wasn't finished. Data needed to be backed up by evidence. I went through my bank statements, month by month, and took screenshots of every single transfer to my parents' account, highlighting each one with a digital red box. I found the ATM withdrawal receipt for the $800 in cash. I took a picture of it. I organized everything into a neat folder on my desktop. I named the folder The Invoice. Finally, I opened my email. I composed a new message. The recipient, Beverly, my sister. The subject line was simple, professional. Urgent, financial information regarding Mom and Dad. The body of the email was short. It was not emotional. It was not angry. It was a statement of fact. Beverly, I wrote, I believe there is some information regarding Mom and Dad's financial situation over the past 4 months that you have not been made aware of. I have attached a detailed ledger for your review. I think it's time we had a conversation. I clicked the paperclip icon. I attached the spreadsheet. I attached every single screenshot and photo. I let my cursor hover over the send button. My heart was pounding now, a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. This was it. This was the point of no return. I was no longer the sweet, compliant, invisible Janet. I was a woman with a ledger and a mountain of evidence. I was done being a victim. It was time to become a problem. I took a deep breath, and I clicked send. After I sent that email to Beverly, a strange sort of peace settled over me. I had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back. I expected an immediate, explosive response, a flurry of angry texts, a frantic phone call. But for 2 full days, there was nothing, just silence. It was a tense, unnerving quiet, like the eerie calm before a hurricane makes landfall. I knew they were talking to each other. I could almost hear the frantic whispers, the strategizing. They were preparing their counterattack. And I knew it wouldn't be a white flag. It would be a full-scale assault, designed to put me back in my place. The summons came on a Wednesday evening. It was a text from my mom. Family dinner tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Don't be late, we need to talk. It wasn't a request, it was a command. They had chosen their battlefield, home turf. A place where they held all the power, where the walls themselves were soaked in a lifetime of my submission. I texted back a single word. Okay. I spent the next 24 hours preparing for war. I printed out the spreadsheet. I printed out every bank statement, every receipt. I put them all in a crisp manila folder. I wasn't just bringing my feelings to that dinner. I was bringing facts. I was bringing proof. I chose my outfit carefully, not the comfortable jeans and sweater I usually wore, but a pair of sharp black pants, a silk blouse, and a blazer. It was my armor. It was the uniform of a woman who was no longer asking for a seat at the table, but was prepared to flip the whole damn thing over if she had to. When I walked into my parents' house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My dad was in his usual recliner, looking healthier but with a stern, disappointed expression on his face. My mom was bustling around the kitchen, her movements sharp and jerky. And Beverly was sitting at the dining room table, her arms crossed, a look of regal indignation on her face. She was the queen, and I was the disloyal subject, summoned to the throne room to be judged. No one said hello. Dinner was a silent, excruciating affair. The only sounds were the clinking of silverware against plates and the strained, formal questions my dad would ask about my work. So, is your company busy these days? They were treating me like a stranger, a business acquaintance they were forced to entertain. It was all part of the performance. They were setting the stage, trying to make me feel small, isolated, and out of place before the main event began. Finally, after the plates were cleared, my mom stood at the head of the table wiping her hands on her apron. Well, she began, her voice dripping with faux reasonableness. I think we all know why we're here. Beverly spoke next, her lawyerly tone sharp and accusatory. Janet, I received your rather dramatic email. Frankly, I'm shocked. And a little hurt. To think that you would keep score, like you're some kind of martyr. Family helps family. It's not a transaction. Not a transaction. I almost laughed, coming from the woman who had never once had to worry about a bill in her life. My dad chimed in, his deep voice laced with patriarchal authority. Your mother and I are deeply disappointed, Janet. We raised you to be better than this, to be generous. This spreadsheet. He gestured vaguely towards the air, as if the very idea of it was distasteful. It's petty. It's unbecoming. The trap was set. They had formed a united front. The martyr. The petty one. The disappointment. They had assigned me my role, and now they expected me to play my part. They expected me to crumble, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness for the crime of what, exactly? For the crime of telling the truth? My mom delivered what she thought would be the final blow. She walked over to me, her expression a perfect blend of sorrow and condescension. Janet, honey, she said, her voice soft and cloying. We know you're struggling. It's okay. Your father and I, and Beverly, we've talked. We don't want you to feel this pressure to contribute anymore. You should focus on finding a more stable career path. Get your life in order. And then, she went in for the kill. She looked around the table, at my dad, at Beverly, as if seeking their support for this obvious, painful truth she was about to deliver. She turned back to me, her eyes cold. I just don't understand why you can't be more like your sister, she said, her voice flat, stating it as a simple fact. Beverly has her life together. A real career, a wonderful fiancé, a future. You'll never be as good as your sister, Janet. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can learn to be happy with less. There it was. The words that had haunted me my entire life, finally spoken out loud, not in a moment of anger, but as a calm, rational assessment. A final verdict on my worth. And in that moment, the plan I had, the evidence I had brought, it all felt inadequate. This wasn't a logical argument. This was a deep, spiritual sickness in my family. But the coldness inside me, the clarity I had found a few days prior, held firm. The little girl was gone, and the woman who remained was not going to cry. I let her words hang in the air for a long, silent moment. I looked at each of them. My father nodded solemn agreement. My sister, looking down at her perfectly manicured nails, unable to meet my eyes, but complicit in her silence. And my mother, standing there, smug and triumphant, convinced she had just won. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I placed the glass down on the table with a soft click, and then I looked directly at my mother. "Then ask her to pay your bills," I said. My voice was quiet. It wasn't a shout. It was a statement. The four of them just stared at me. The air in the room went still. My mom let out a short, nervous laugh. "What did you say? Don't be ridiculous." "I'm not being ridiculous," I said, my voice remaining perfectly level. "I'm being practical. Ask your successful daughter, the one who is as good as you need her to be, to pay your bills." I turned my gaze to Beverly. Ask her to cover the mortgage. Ask her to pay for Dad's medical expenses, because as of tonight, I'm done. The color drained from my mother's face. Beverly's jaw tightened. "Janet, that's enough," my dad boomed, his voice rising. "You will not speak to your mother and sister that way." "Oh, I'm just getting started," I said, and I reached down into my bag, pulled out the manila folder and placed it in the center of the dining room table with a soft thud that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. "You want to talk about things being petty and unbecoming? Let's talk about facts." I opened the folder. "You're right, Beverly. Family helps family. So let's review my help." I slid the spreadsheet across the table towards her. 4 months of mortgage payments, total $11,200. I slid a stack of highlighted bank statements on top of it. Dad's prescription co-pays and uncovered medical expenses, total $3,508. Another stack of receipts followed. Utilities, keeping the lights on, the water running, total $1,200. More statements. My voice was a monotone, the voice of an auditor reading a report. And my personal favorite, the $800 cash payment to the caterer at your engagement party, Beverly, because Mom didn't want to bother you on your special day. I slid the ATM receipt to the top of the pile. "The total of my petty contributions over the past 4 months," I said, looking each of them in the eye, "comes to $16,708, all from the daughter who is still figuring things out. Does that look like struggling to you, Mom?" My mother just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, no words coming out. She looked utterly lost, her carefully constructed reality shattering around her in real time. But I wasn't finished. I had saved the best for last. "And after all of that," I said, my voice dropping, becoming more personal, more dangerous. "After I drained my savings account, the one you didn't even know I had, to keep you from losing this house, you came to my apartment, and you asked me to sell Grandma's brooch." That was the one that hit my dad. I saw him flinch, his eyes widening in disbelief as he looked at my mom. "You asked me to sell the one thing I have left of her," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "Not for an emergency, but for flowers. For your perfect daughter's perfect wedding." I leaned back in my chair. The boom had happened. I had dropped the bomb right in the middle of their perfect family dinner. I didn't need to say another word. I had laid the truth out on the table, in black and white, in dollars and cents. The silence that followed was the sound of their world collapsing. It was the sound of my freedom. The silence that followed my final statement was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and arrogance out of the room. I watched their faces one by one. My father looked pale, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass. He looked from the pile of papers on the table to my mother, a flicker of something I had never seen before in his eyes. Not just disappointment, but betrayal. My sister Beverly, the high-powered lawyer, was, for once in her life, utterly speechless. Her composure had cracked. She was staring at the spreadsheet, her eyes scanning the numbers, her mind, I'm sure, processing the evidence with the cold, hard logic of her profession. She was seeing the truth not as a feeling, but as a case against her own mother. But my mother. Her reaction was the most telling. The smug superiority was gone. The condescension had vanished. In its place was a raw, primal panic. It wasn't the panic of remorse. It wasn't the dawning horror of a mother realizing how deeply she had wounded her child. No, it was the frantic animal panic of someone whose supply line had just been cut. This is a joke, right? She stammered, looking around the table for an ally. Janet, this isn't funny. You're trying to make me look bad. Look bad? I asked, my voice still eerily calm. I'm not trying to make you look like anything, Mom. I'm just showing you what it is. These are your bills. And this, I tapped the bank statements, is my money. The money you took, while telling me I was a failure. Beverly finally found her voice, but it wasn't the sharp, confident tone she usually had. It was thin and shaky. Mom, the brooch. Is this true? Did you ask her to sell Grandma's brooch? My mother's head snapped towards her. You don't understand, she cried, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. The wedding, it has to be perfect. I was just trying to make it nice for you. That was when the first cracks in their united front began to show. Beverly just stared at her, horrified. The justification was so flimsy, so utterly selfish, that even she couldn't defend it. I think I've said everything I need to say, I announced, pushing my chair back from the table. The sound scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh, definitive noise. The next mortgage payment is due in 2 weeks. I suggest you figure it out. I picked up my bag, leaving the folder, the invoice, sitting in the center of the table like a memorial to the family we once pretended to be. I walked out of the dining room, down the hall, and towards the front door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their eyes on my back, a mixture of shock, fury, and utter helplessness. I had barely started my car when my phone began to buzz. It was my mom. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. By the time I was halfway home, I had 7 missed calls and a string of frantic text messages. They started with disbelief. Janet, pick up the phone. We need to talk about this reasonably. Then they moved to bargaining. Okay, I'm sorry if I upset you. Let's just talk. And finally, they devolved into pure, unfiltered panic. What are we going to do? The mortgage. Janet, you can't do this to us. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 28 years. It wasn't a breath of relief. Not yet. It was the exhausted gasp of a soldier who had just survived the first wave of an attack. I knew the siege was just beginning. My phone rang again. This time, it was Beverly. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to answer. I needed to know what their next move was. What do you want, Beverly? I asked, my voice flat. I expected her to yell, to accuse me, to defend our mother. but her voice was subdued, almost clinical. "I'm looking at this spreadsheet, Janet," she said. "I've cross-referenced the dates with the bank statements you sent. Did you really pay for the catering?" "The last $800 of it," I confirmed. "In cash. At Mom's request." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing. "I had no idea," she finally said. "She told me everything was fine. She said Dad's insurance was covering everything." "Did she also tell you she wanted me to sell Grandma's brooch to pay for your flowers?" I asked. The silence on the other end was even longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "No," she said. "She did not." I thought, for a fleeting second, that maybe this was a breakthrough. Maybe she finally understood. But then, the lifetime of conditioning, of being the golden child, kicked in. "Look, Janet," she said, her tone shifting, becoming more authoritative. "Mom is hysterical right now. You really handled this badly. You embarrassed her. You embarrassed all of us. You should have come to me privately." And there it was. The blame shift. It wasn't about what our mother had done. It was about how I had reacted. I had broken the unspoken rule. I had aired the family's dirty laundry, and in their world, that was a greater sin than the laundry itself. "Privately?" I asked, my voice dripping with an irony that was lost on her. "I've been handling this privately for 4 months, Beverly, while you were planning your European vacation. My private handling of the situation is the only reason you all still have a house to have these dramatic family dinners in." "That's not fair," she shot back. "If I had known, I would have helped." "Would you have?" I challenged. "Or would you have been too busy with your important cases? We'll never know, will we? Because Mom was too proud to ask her successful daughter for help." But she had no problem taking every last cent from her disappointment daughter. We went back and forth for another 10 minutes, a circular, pointless argument. She was a lawyer, trained to debate, to find the loophole, to control the narrative. But I had something she didn't. The truth, and a complete and utter lack of anything left to lose. The next morning, the real campaign of manipulation began. It started with my dad. He called, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Janet," he said, "your mother is a mess. She hasn't slept. You've broken her heart." He talked about family unity, about forgiveness. He reminded me of all the things they had done for me over the years, conveniently forgetting the fine print of every transaction. "How can you do this to your own family?" he asked. It was a classic guilt trip, expertly executed. But the calm, cold place inside me didn't flinch. "I didn't do this, Dad," I replied. "I just stopped paying for it." When guilt didn't work, my mother switched tactics to straight-up gaslighting and revisionist history. She sent me a long, rambling text message that was a masterpiece of self-pity and blame-shifting. "I can't believe you would twist my words like that," it read. "I was only trying to help you feel included in the wedding. Selling the brooch was just an idea, a way for you to contribute something special. You always take things so personally. You've always been so sensitive." She tried to reframe her exploitation as an act of generosity. She tried to convince me that the problem wasn't her actions, but my interpretation of them. She ended the text with the ultimate emotional blackmail. "I did the best I could. I'm sorry I wasn't a perfect mother. I'm sorry I failed you." It was a non-apology, designed to make me feel like the cruel, unforgiving monster for not immediately absolving her of all wrongdoing. But the final, most desperate attempt came from Beverly a few days later. The mortgage payment was looming. The panic was real now. She called me, her voice all business. "Okay, Janet, let's be logical about this," she said. "Clearly there have been some misunderstandings. We can't change the past, but we need to deal with the present. Dad can't handle any more stress right now. So, here's the deal. I will personally pay you back $5,000 of what you've spent, and you will resume paying the mortgage until Dad is back at work. We'll call it a loan. We'll even write up a contract. It's a fair offer. A fair offer. It was a business negotiation. She was trying to bargain with me, to buy my silence, to purchase my compliance so that her world could go back to normal. She wasn't offering an apology. She wasn't acknowledging the years of emotional damage. She was offering a settlement. A fraction of what I was owed in exchange for me going back to my designated role as the family ATM. I listened to her whole pitch without interrupting. When she was finished, I took a breath. "Beverly," I said, my voice calm and final. "Let me be pleased. This isn't about the money anymore. The money is just the proof. This is about respect. Something you and Mom have never, ever given me. My support is not for sale, not for $5,000, not for $1 million. You are all on your own now. You want to be logical? Then it's time for you to open your own spreadsheet." I hung up the phone before she could say another word. The siege was over. I had held the line. And for the first time in my life, I was truly, completely, gloriously free. Hanging up on Beverly felt like stepping off a cliff into thin air. For a moment, there was sheer terror. The silence in my apartment was absolute. I had just severed the final line. I had burned the last bridge. The bombardment of calls and texts had stopped. It was over. And I was completely, utterly alone. The adrenaline that had fueled me for the past week drained away, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I sank onto my couch, the weight of my newfound freedom feeling terrifyingly heavy. That's when I made a call I should have made a long time ago. I called my best friend Chloe. We had known each other since community college, and she was the one person who had seen glimpses of the dysfunction, though I had always downplayed it, always made excuses for my family. When she picked up, all I could manage to say was her name. My voice broke, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I started to cry. It wasn't the quiet, pleading tears of the old Janet. It was a raw, cathartic sob, a release of 28 years of pent-up pain. "I'm coming over," she said, no questions asked. 20 minutes later, she was at my door with a bottle of wine and a tub of ice cream. I told her everything, every last humiliating detail. The condescending comments, the financial drain, the engagement party, the brooch. I laid it all out, the ugly truth of it all. I half expected her to be shocked, but she just listened, her expression growing more and more grim. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes. She didn't tell me, "They're still your family." She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Good for you. It's about damn time." Hearing that validation from someone on the outside, someone whose opinion wasn't clouded by a toxic family history, it was like a lifeline. "You're not the bad guy here, Janet," she told me, pouring me a glass of wine. "You're a survivor. They weren't a family. They were a system, and you were its primary resource. When you cut off the supply, the system crashed. That's not on you. That's on them." Chloe stayed with me that night. We talked for hours. We didn't just talk about my family. We talked about my future, about my business, about the life I wanted to build for myself, now that I was no longer shackled to their expectations. For the first time, my future felt like a wide-open landscape, not a narrow path I was being forced down. The next morning, I did something I had been putting off for years. I took the money that was left in my savings, the money that I had managed to protect, and I made an appointment with a financial advisor. A real one. I walked into his office feeling nervous, like an imposter. But as I laid out my business plan, my freelance income, my goals, he didn't see a little art project. He saw potential. He saw a viable business. He helped me set up a retirement account, an investment portfolio, and a strategy for growth. He treated me like a serious professional. He treated me like an adult. It was a revelation. My work became my sanctuary. Now that I wasn't constantly stressed about my family's next financial crisis, a new level of creativity and focus unlocked within me. I was on fire. I landed 2 new major clients in the span of a month. My boss, Sarah, called me into her office. I braced myself for more work, but that's not what she wanted. "Janet," she said, "I've been watching you. Your work has always been excellent, but lately, it's been exceptional. You're not just a designer anymore. You're a strategist. I want to offer you the position of creative director for your team. A promotion. A real one. Based on merit. Based on my actual talent and hard work. It came with a huge salary increase, but more importantly, it came with respect. It was the validation I had craved from my parents my whole life, and here it was, being handed to me by a woman who owed me nothing but a paycheck. With my newfound confidence, I started saying yes to other things too. I started dating again. I met a guy named David. He was a high school history teacher who played guitar in a local band on weekends. He was kind and funny, and when I told him what I did for a living, his eyes lit up. He didn't ask how much I made. He asked what I was passionate about creating. He thought my art projects were incredible. On our third date, he took me to an open mic night. I was terrified, but he convinced me to get up on stage and tell a story about one of my favorite designs. And people listened. They clapped. David looked at me from the back of the room with a smile that made me feel like I was the only person there. He wasn't a surgeon. He didn't drive a BMW. But he saw me, the real me, and he thought she was amazing. My phone remained silent. I had blocked my mother's number. It was a simple act, just a few taps on a screen, but it felt like building a fortress wall. It was me, declaring my own sovereignty. For the first time in my life, I was not going to back down. I was choosing myself over their comfort. This was a monumental moment. If you support this powerful decision, drop a flexed bicep emoji in the comments to send some strength her way on this journey. The silence from my family was deafening, but the noise of my new life was starting to get louder. The laughter with Chloe, the strategic meetings with my financial advisor, the applause at the open mic night, the quiet conversations with David. This was the sound of a life being built, a life I was choosing. I was creating my own family, a family of choice, made up of people who supported me, respected me, and valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide. They were the pillars of my new world, a world where I was finally the main character in my own story, not a supporting role in someone else's, and I was just beginning to realize how incredible that story could be. 6 months. It's amazing how much can change in 6 months. My mornings no longer started with a jolt of anxiety about which bill was due or what passive-aggressive comment was coming my way. They started with coffee on the balcony of my new apartment, a place I had rented that was closer to the city, closer to my new life. The promotion to creative director had been a game changer, but the real victory was my freelance business. After landing the regional restaurant chain contract, word of mouth spread like wildfire. I was turning down work. I had so much business that I finally did what I had only dreamed of. I quit my day job. I was now the full-time CEO of my own creative company. My life was my own, built from the ground up, on my own terms. My relationship with David had blossomed into something real and steady. He was my biggest cheerleader, the first one to see a new design, the one who would bring me dinner when I was working late to meet a deadline. He never once made me feel like my ambition was a flaw. He saw it as my superpower. My family of choice, as Chloe called it, was thriving. My world was peaceful. It was productive. It was happy. The silence from my biological family had been absolute for months, but news has a way of trickling through the cracks. Through a brief, factual phone call with Beverly, I learned what had happened after I walked out that door. The consequences of my abdication had been swift and severe. Without my monthly infusions of cash, their carefully constructed lifestyle crumbled. Beverly and Richard had to cancel their 2-week European dream vacation. That money, the thousands they had set aside for luxury hotels and wine tastings in Tuscany, was immediately diverted to pay my parents' mortgage for the next few months. For the first time in her life, Beverly had to look at a utility bill and wonder how it would get paid. She had to sit down with my dad and go through their finances, discovering the debt and the lack of savings that my contributions had been masking for years. It was a brutal, humbling education. My parents had to sell their second car, my dad's prized sedan. They canceled their cable subscription and their country club membership. Their world, once cushioned by my silent sacrifice, was now starkly defined by the hard edges of reality. The golden child was finally being forced to carry the weight she had been unknowingly shielded from her entire life. Then, a week before Thanksgiving, a call came from a number I didn't have saved in my phone. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. It was Beverly. Her voice was different. The sharp, lawyerly edge was gone, replaced by something softer, more hesitant. There was no negotiation in her tone, no demands. "Hi, Janet," she said. "I know this is last minute and I completely understand if you say no, but I was hoping maybe you'd come for Thanksgiving." I was silent for a long moment. "Why?" I asked. It was a genuine question. "Because it's time," she said, her voice quiet. "It's long past time. I need to apologize. And so does Mom." I went. I didn't go for them. I went by myself. I needed to see if the change was real or if it was just another performance. When I walked in with David, the house felt different, quieter, more humble. The dinner was simple, not the usual ostentatious spread my mother used to put on. After the meal, we sat in the living room. My dad looked at me, his eyes filled with a tired sadness, but also a glimmer of respect. But it was my mother who finally spoke. She looked at me, her hands twisting in her lap. Her eyes were red. "Janet," she started, her voice thick with an emotion I had never heard from her before. It was genuine remorse. "I am so sorry." The words seemed to physically pain her to say, but she pushed on. "For all of it. For making you feel less than. For not seeing what was right in front of me. I was so focused on the wrong things. On what I thought success looked like. I was so blind. And I was wrong. You saved us. And I treated you like you were worthless. I am so sorry." Beverly spoke next. "She's right, Janet. I was blind too. I was living in a bubble and I never bothered to look outside of it. I took everything for granted, including you. What you did. I don't know if I would have had the strength to do that. I'm sorry for my part in all of it. I listened. I absorbed their words, and I believed them. I saw the toll the last 6 months had taken. I saw the forced humility, the painful growth. I accept your apology," I said, and the words felt true. "But I need you both to understand. Things are different now. They have to be. I love this family, but I will not be your safety net anymore. I will not be your ATM. Our relationship from now on, if we're going to have one, will be built on respect. On reality." Looking back, I realized the most important invoice I ever wrote wasn't for a client. It was for myself. It was a detailed accounting of my own worth. For years, I had allowed my value to be determined by their approval, a currency they refused to pay. But true value isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you build, invoice by invoice, late night by late night, until you've created a life that is so undeniably yours, no one can ever put a price on it or tell you it's not enough. Financial independence isn't just about money, it's the freedom to say no, the power to choose your own path, the right to define your own worth. And sometimes, family isn't the one you're born into, but the one you build with people who see your value from the start. This journey taught me so much, but I know I'm not the only one who has faced this kind of struggle. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family members who took you for granted? How did you handle it? And what did you learn from that experience? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice. Thank you for listening.